what a treat. A radar after all this time. What is on your radar today?
We'll see if you still feel that way after I'm done. All right, here we go. Ben Collins is a reporter for NBC News who specializes in coverage of disinformation and extremism, particularly on social media. His work has earned him many plaudits, including a 2023 Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Television Political Journalism. Collins is treated as an expert in the burgeoning field of countering the spread of misinformation, yet his error rate is noteworthy. Take the Gaza hospital explosion, for example. On Tuesday, reports surfaced that the hospital in Gaza had come under attack, resulting in as many as 500 deaths. The New York Times ran with this headline, "Israel strike kills hundreds in hospital," Palestinians say. Underneath this headline was an image of an obliterated building. Readers who squinted would have noticed that this was not a hospital, but a completely different target. The Times' only source for information about the explosion was the Gaza Health Ministry. Mainstream reporting noted that Palestinian authorities laid the blame squarely on an Israeli airstrike. Now, subsequent intelligence reports from both Israel and the U.S. provide somewhat compelling evidence that the hospital was most probably struck by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a terrorist group. Did Collins soberly wait for these facts to come in? Nope. The award-winning disinformation expert helped circulate the inaccurate claims of the Palestinian authorities. When other voices on social media recommended caution, Collins chimed in, responding to assert that any delay in reporting the horrific casualty numbers represented a profound moral failing. Casualty estimates, by the way, have yet to be confirmed. Now, in theory, the confusion surrounding the hospital explosion is a great topic for a self-described disinformation reporter. Many left-leaning writers and political figures recklessly endorsed the Palestinian view that Israel had bombed the hospital. Representatives Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar both made such statements blaming Israel, did not swiftly delete them after that became more complicated. Eventually, Omar did acknowledge the new information, but Tlaib again blamed Israel for the explosion during a speech she made at a pro-Palestinian rally outside the U.S. Capitol yesterday. Now, is this not something worthy of coverage and correction by Collins and company? Keep in mind that Collins represents the journalistic side of a multifaceted effort to monitor and eliminate purportedly wrong ideas. Disinformation tracking has become an industry unto itself, and aspects of this industry enjoy government funding. A disinformation watchdog group that called on advertisers to divest from various non-liberal news sources, including Reason Magazine, where I also work, received funding from the U.S. State Department. Disinformation reporters often seem interested in sparring only with contrarian people and in defense of the mainstream narratives. They spar with Matt Taibbi, with Glenn Greenwald, with Elon Musk, and others. Collins, for instance, is obsessed with these people. He downplayed the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story. What a surprise. He also denied that there was any effort to censor the lab leak theory of COVID-19's origins, even after ceaseless revelations that various government agencies pressured social media companies to deplatform contrarian speech about precisely these topics. Collins' reporting often contains basic errors that suggest he doesn't particularly understand the right-wing forces he's denouncing. His most recent article alleges that Musk's plans for Twitter were shaped by a far-right former Trump administration staffer, even though it's fairly clear that staffer wasn't actually telling Musk what to do, but rather warning Musk what he thought would happen to Musk if he offended the regime. Now, if that sounds conspiratorial, try to follow this clip of Collins and MSNBC's Rachel Maddow elucidating this sinister Musk plan. I cannot possibly describe this clip, so just watch it.
And I mean, the thing about the Anti-Defamation League being the target here is this is a Jewish civil rights organization. To have these two things line up, where you've got these recommendations to Musk to do all these things that he has done that will elicit the reaction that has occurred, and then he should blame a Jewish civil rights group, to have that along with people proposing that sort of roadmap publicly, who are associated with white nationalists. And a ragged far-right fringe so distasteful to even the Trump White House that they felt the need to fire somebody from the White House who was espousing these kinds of views and associating with these people. I mean, that to me just feels like fireworks. It just feels like an incredibly dangerous thing.
Yeah, if you actually look back through this, and I've talked to a lot of people on the Elon Musk beat over the last few months, and what they want to say to you is that while all of this stuff looks like chaos and nonsense and like he doesn't know what he's doing, it's possible this guy had a plan. And just because a plan is bad and leads to bad outcomes for almost everybody doesn't mean he didn't have a plan. And that's what we saw, coming out of this. Can I just read you to the end of this article? Because it's kind of fascinating. He says, the globalist American empire will never be brought down unless people like Elon Musk are ready to step up to the plate with the genuinely bold, risky, and meaningful moves like buying and liberating Twitter. But it will not be easy. It will be war. Let the battle begin. That's what was texted him, by the way, at the end there. And then they recommend hiring a CEO of enforcement, which they wound up doing with Linda Yaccarino. Basically, one-to-one, this strategy happened in real time on Twitter. So I'm just suggesting, maybe think about this as a plan. It's a bad plan for you and me, but it may have been a plan all along.
What? If you're going to paint broad swaths of opinion that depart from the mainstream orthodoxies as paranoid and conspiratorial, you should probably take greater pains to avoid echoing paranoia and conspiracy. You should also beware of elementary errors like immediately taking a terrorist group's assertion at face value and call out others who make them. Now, perhaps the Walter Cronkite Awards ought to have slightly higher standards. Collins, of course, not the only journalist who gets things wrong. Happens to everyone. But I think there's something extra galling about journalistic errors when they are perpetrated by someone who holds himself out as especially talented at identifying lies. And that's the real problem with this army of self-appointed fact-checkers and misinformation watchdogs who police social media with particular focus on alternative content creators like us. They're frequently no less wrong than anyone else. Earlier this week, Reuters reported that U.S. lawmakers were, quote, seeking answers from Meta, X, Google, and TikTok about the spread of false information on those platforms. Deceptive content has ricocheted across social media sites since the conflict began, sometimes receiving millions of views. That was Senator Michael Bennet, a Democrat from Colorado, writing a letter to those companies. His framing totally ignores the fact that some of the most pernicious misstatements about the situation in Gaza were peddled by the mainstream, by journalistic institutions like the New York Times. On social media, there's some wrong stuff, but people are also able to challenge prevailing narratives that the expert class has blindly accepted. For instance, Community Notes, the crowdsourced Wikipedia-style fact-checking system on X, is often able to provide useful context about claims that appear on the platform from both sides. Disinformation reporters, on the other hand, are extremely partisan, and they're prone to error. Let's stop pretending they have some special magical power to separate the truth from the lies. No one has that power.
Yeah, so I guess I don't disagree about people who hold themselves out as experts. I don't know that I take the lesson as the lesson from the hospital bombing controversy that anyone should be making very definitive claims in the other direction. I mean, I do think it is very healthy to be skeptical of Hamas's claims. It's also important to be very skeptical of Israel's claims and the IDF's claims, especially because I don't know much about Hamas, but I do know from several stories, including those that we've covered here on this show, that the IDF has a pattern of repeatedly lying when it is under scrutiny for its own bad behavior. Most notably, and I mentioned this in another segment, the murder of American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by an IDF member. For about a year, if I recall correctly, they flatly denied the IDF's fault. The story continued to shift as more and more culpability and media attention was paid toward it. This is from a statement that the IDF made, a press release in June of 2022. They go out of their way to say it's not just us investigating. The PLO, the Palestinian Authority, is involved in this investigation. And the IDF investigation clearly concludes that Ms. Abu Akleh was not intentionally shot by an IDF soldier and that it is not possible to determine whether she was killed by a Palestinian gunman shooting indiscriminately in her area or inadvertently by an IDF soldier. Cut to like half a year later, and because of other investigations and continued pressure from media figures who are interested in finding out the truth and not just getting points for being on the right side of something or another, the Israel Defense Forces have admitted for the first time that there is a, quote, high possibility that she was shot by their own and eventually was forced to apologize. So I do think even now, I also believed the other night that it seemed likely that the IDF was responsible, largely because if it were true that the hospital was demolished, there is no pattern, there is no history, there's no precedent for Hamas having rockets of the power to be able to do that. When the sun came up and the building was still standing, I think that undermined the strongest argument for why it had to be the IDF. But I still don't see a very strong argument for why it had to be this Islamist Jihad group or Hamas. And so I'm interested to see a little bit more in the way of investigation that is not Israel and not just the United States in conjunction with Israel, given that we've seen how we walk in lockstep with our greatest ally.
No disagreement that you should be skeptical of things government says to you. That goes for Israel's government, that goes for the U.S. government, that goes for Russia, that goes for China. The nature of government is to deceive people if there's information that looks bad for various officials or for an administration or something like that. Of course, I would never be saying, well, you just have to blindly trust what you've told. Our government misled us about the strength of the intelligence regarding so many things. You know, we've debunked mainstream thinking and reporting and intelligence on a lot of national security topics. All that said, it looks to me like the bulk of evidence, even evidence that is sort of, I would say, independently available, including video footage I've now seen of rockets coming from the Palestinian side, and then it's showing the hospital perimeter being hit at that exact time period, seems to line up and be very consistent with
I don't know.
Palestinian. So
there has been this Channel 4
we should wait and hear more, but
that
I think
points out that in Israel's old presentation about what happened, they cite 2 different launch sites for the rockets. So there's inconsistency even with their own stories still. So again, I think that what I have learned from this, and what I hope most people have learned from this, is just to take a beat. And I do think that there is pressure, especially online, to come out and say conclusively what you feel. And I think that's fine. Like, it's not really that harmful. It's regular people just going through the evidence and trying to weigh it back and forth. But for journalists and people who are considered to be holding a higher public trust and have investigative tools at their disposal, it's just worth waiting a bit.
Right, and that's what I'm really irritated about, because Ben Collins had replies to people saying that it was morally blameworthy to have any delay in reporting the casualty numbers, and we don't know, and again, we all make these kinds of mistakes, especially in heated breaking news situations like this. But I just think people who hold themselves out, I mean, I don't like this entire category of reporting, this misinformation framing, because we have been targeted by it. And a lot of people who have independent and contrarian ideas, like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald, have also been targeted by it. And it's partly government funded, and it's wholly aimed at encouraging censorship. So I'm gonna use every opportunity to twist the knife when I see mistakes of this size. We'll have more Rising right after this.